Case 1. The Children of the Trunk, Jocelyn and Larry. On July 28, 2021, a Baltimore County police officer initiated what seemed like a routine traffic stop on Eastern Boulevard in Essex, Maryland. The driver, 33-year-old Nicole Johnson, appeared calm as the officer prepared to tow her unregistered, uninsured vehicle, but when he stepped closer, he noticed something no training could prepare him for: the heavy, unmistakable scent of human decomposition. When the trunk was opened, the truth emerged. Inside a suitcase lay the body of 7-year-old Jocelyn Marie James Johnson. Beside her, in a plastic tote, was her 5-year-old brother, Larry O'Neill. Both had been dead for months. The discovery ended a mystery no one yet knew existed, revealing the unimaginable betrayal of 2 children who had vanished long before the world realized they were gone. Jocelyn and Larry had been living with their aunt, Nicole Johnson, since 2019. Their mother, facing personal struggles, had left them temporarily in Johnson's care, believing they would be safe until she could bring them home. She tried repeatedly to find them but couldn't reach her sister. Phone calls went unanswered, visits were deflected, and the children quietly disappeared from the family's sight. What no one knew then was that by the time their grandmother and mother were still hoping to see them again, both children were already gone. The investigation that followed pieced together a timeline of prolonged abuse and concealment. Autopsy findings showed that Jocelyn had been dead for nearly a year before discovery, and Larry for at least 2 months. Both children were severely underweight and bore the unmistakable signs of long-term neglect. According to the case records, Johnson admitted that in May 2020, she struck Jocelyn after the child tried to take food from a refrigerator inside a Baltimore County motel room. The blow caused a fatal head injury. Johnson said she wrapped the little girl in a suitcase and kept it in her car. 2 months before the 2021 traffic stop, Larry never woke up. Rather than call for help, she placed his body into a tote beside his sister. For almost a year, she drove that car, shopping, working, and sleeping within reach of the hidden remains. When the officer confronted her about the odor during the stop, Johnson's reply was haunting in its detachment. "It don't matter," she said. "You're going to see me on the news." It was not the voice of panic or guilt, but recognition, an acknowledgement that what she had done was finally being uncovered. That remark, captured in the officer's report, became the defining statement of the case. A calm acceptance of exposure after months of concealment. The courtroom proceedings stripped the case of any remaining ambiguity. Nicole Johnson pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree child abuse, resulting in death. Prosecutors presented her own statements and the forensic findings as evidence of intentional cruelty and prolonged disregard for life. In February 2025, Baltimore County Circuit Court Judge Robert Cahill, Jr. sentenced Johnson to life imprisonment, suspending all but 50 years, followed by 5 years of supervised probation and a permanent prohibition on contact with minors. The sentence, reported by multiple Maryland outlets, marked one of the state's harshest in recent memory for child abuse deaths. For the victim's family, the verdict was a solemn recognition of what was lost. Their grandmother, who had once waited for the children to return home, stood in the courtroom with tears in her eyes. Their mother, silent through much of the hearing, faced the reality that the sister she had trusted with her children had destroyed them. Prosecutors described Jocelyn and Larry as bright, trusting, and full of promise. 2 young lives erased through cruelty and indifference. The story of Jocelyn and Larry is one that challenges the meaning of family and the limits of justice. It is not only a record of 2 small victims, but a reflection of how neglect can turn into tragedy when no one is watching. Their discovery ended their silence, but it also gave them back their names. In that courtroom, the world was forced to remember that behind every file and photograph were 2 children who deserved better. Children whose innocence demanded that their story never fade from memory. Case 2. The Cake Punishment. Jack Garcia. A birthday that ended in death? In June 2015, the city of Hagerstown, Maryland, was shaken by a crime so senseless it defied comprehension. A 9-year-old boy named Jack Garcia was beaten to death for eating a piece of birthday cake without permission. Behind the closed door of a small apartment, 3 adults, his mother, her boyfriend, and his uncle, allowed violence to replace care and silence to take the place of love. The home, meant to shelter a family, became a place of cruelty and fear. Court records and police statements revealed that the fatal night began with a trivial argument. Wilson discovered that Jack had eaten a slice of birthday cake. What should have been a small moment of childhood mischief became an act that cost the boy his life. According to the Hagerstown Police Department and Frederick County prosecutors, Barajas handcuffed Jack before Wilson launched into a violent beating. The blows were so severe that Jack lost consciousness. Instead of calling for help, the adults hesitated. For nearly 90 minutes, they delayed contacting emergency services while the boy lay dying. When paramedics finally arrived, they were met with resistance. Garcia refused at first to let them treat her son. Jack was rushed to Frederick Memorial Hospital, but it was too late. He died from multiple blunt force injuries to his head and torso. Investigators soon discovered this was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of ongoing abuse. Police said both Garcia and Barajas had mistreated Jack in the past. Teachers had noticed his fear and withdrawn demeanor, and social workers had expressed concern about his well-being. But like so many children trapped in quiet danger, Jack suffered behind a door no one opened soon enough. The arrests came swiftly. Robert Wilson, age 30, was charged with first-degree assault, first-degree child abuse, and later second-degree murder. Oriana Garcia was charged with second-degree murder, first-degree child abuse, and neglect of a minor. Jacob Andrew Barajas, then 23, faced second-degree murder and child abuse for his role in restraining the boy. Police said Barajas helped handcuff Jack, effectively trapping him for the assault that followed. Out of 3 adults who should have cherished the life of a young boy, the heart of evil bound them beyond humanity to unleash such cruelty and call it discipline. In court, prosecutors described a home ruled by control and fear. The mother's failure to protect her son was as devastating as the physical assault itself. During sentencing, one prosecutor said, "This wasn't about discipline. It was about power. A child died for eating a piece of cake." The judge agreed, calling it one of the most disturbing cases ever seen in the county. In March 2017, Oriana Garcia pleaded guilty to first-degree child abuse, resulting in death, and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Robert Wilson received 30 years for second-degree murder, and Jacob Barajas was sentenced to 15 years for his role in handcuffing Jack and preventing timely medical aid. The story became known as the birthday cake murder, and it left Maryland and the nation grappling with how a child's small act of hunger could lead to such cruelty. After the sentencing, neighbors and teachers gathered outside the family's apartment complex, leaving candles, teddy bears, and handwritten notes. One teacher remembered Jack as the kind of boy who wanted everyone else to smile, even when he was hurting inside. Jack Garcia's death remains a scar on the conscience of Maryland. It forced the state to look harder at child abuse warning signs and to ask why so many people saw pieces of his suffering, but not the whole truth. In the end, justice brought sentences, but not peace. The image that endures is simple and devastating. A little boy, handcuffed and beaten, whose only mistake was taking a piece of cake that should have been his. Case 3. The fentanyl tragedy, Nevaeh Carr. In a quiet Glen Burnie neighborhood, what began as a normal morning in February 2023 ended in tragedy that would shake Arundel County to its core. 2-year-old Nevaeh Carr was found unresponsive inside her family's home. Paramedics rushed to save her, but within minutes, the toddler, described by relatives as joyful, playful, and full of light, was gone. The cause was not a sudden illness or an accident. It was fentanyl, a lethal drug so powerful that even a few granules can end a life. Her mother, Tiffany Lynee Carr, stood at the center of the investigation. Detectives soon discovered that Nevaeh's death wasn't the result of an unforeseeable tragedy, but of reckless neglect. Toxicology results showed the child had fentanyl and xylazine, a potent veterinary sedative, in her system. Investigators found that Carr had left fentanyl within reach of her daughter, and that the home contained multiple signs of drug use and unsafe conditions. As the details unfolded, the story became even more heartbreaking. Carr didn't immediately call for help when she realized something was wrong. According to court documents, precious minutes passed before anyone dialed 911. When emergency crews arrived, Nevaeh's body was already cold to the touch. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The toxic mix of fentanyl and xylazine in her system left no chance of survival. Arundel County Police and prosecutors said Carr's inaction and disregard for safety directly led to her daughter's death. What struck investigators most was the indifference that followed. This was a completely preventable death, prosecutors stated. All she had to do was keep the drugs away or call for help. Instead, a toddler's life was extinguished in silence. In July 2025, Carr pleaded guilty to first-degree child abuse resulting in death. During sentencing, the court heard emotional statements from prosecutors and child advocates who described the case as a devastating example of how fentanyl continues to destroy families, not only addicts, but the children who never chose this life. Carr faced a potential 40-year sentence but received 10 years in prison, with the judge calling the punishment a reminder that a mother's choices carry consequences measured in lives, not minutes. In the courtroom, photographs of Nevaeh showed a little girl with soft curls, wide brown eyes, and a smile that could fill a room. Her name, heaven spelled backward, took on a cruel irony in death. Family members sobbed as the judge read the sentence, their grief sharpened by the knowledge that Nevaeh's final moments were spent gasping for breath from a poison she never should have known existed. This case became another warning in Maryland's ongoing fentanyl crisis, a tragic emblem of how addiction, negligence, and silence combine to steal the most innocent lives. Arundel County State's Attorney Ann Colt Lightus said it best. A mother has the highest duty to protect her child. Failing that duty is not just a crime, it's the destruction of the most sacred bond there is. Nevaeh Carr's story is one of unbearable loss. She should have been playing with dolls, learning to count, growing up safe in her mother's arms. Instead, the person meant to keep her safe became the reason she's gone. Her death is a reminder that in the fight against fentanyl, the smallest victims are the ones we lose first, and the ones we can never replace. Case 4. The scissors attack, Ann Catherine Akers, a mother's broken mind. On a cold March morning in 2021, a quiet Bethesda neighborhood in Montgomery County became the scene of a nightmare no one could have imagined. Police were dispatched to a townhouse on King Farm Boulevard after receiving a call that would chill even the most seasoned officers. Inside, they found a young mother, Ann Catherine Akers, 28 years old, kneeling beside her 3-year-old daughter, her hands and clothing soaked in blood. The child was still breathing, but only barely. In her tiny neck were deep cuts made by a pair of scissors, a wound no one should ever inflict, least of all a mother. The responding officers from the Montgomery County Police Department acted within seconds. One officer lifted the child, pressing a cloth to her wound to stop the bleeding, while another called for medics. Their quick response saved her life. The girl was rushed to a trauma center in Washington, D.C., where surgeons performed emergency treatment. Against all odds, she survived. Investigators quickly pieced together what had happened. Court documents revealed that Akers had called a family member the night before, expressing bizarre and alarming thoughts. In the morning, officers arrived to check on her welfare. When they entered her home, they found her holding her child on the floor, blood pooling around them. weapon still close by. She had allegedly tried to end both of their lives. In her disoriented state, she whispered words that left detectives shaken. "She can't live without me." Police arrested Akers at the scene and charged her with first-degree attempted murder, first-degree assault, and child abuse resulting in serious injury. Detectives said the case wasn't rooted in hatred or rage. It was a collapse of mental health. The darkest point of a mother's mind turned against itself. NBC News reported that investigators believed she was experiencing a psychiatric crisis at the time of the attack, struggling with severe emotional instability and isolation. Neighbors described her as quiet but polite, often seen walking her daughter in the park or carrying her groceries alone. No one suspected the turmoil brewing inside her home. One neighbor told reporters, "She always looked tired, like she was holding something in. None of us saw this coming," and the image of officers cradling the wounded child became one of Maryland's most haunting crime photos of the year, a symbol of both unimaginable horror and miraculous survival. The state's attorney's office later confirmed that the little girl made a full physical recovery, though the emotional scars would take years to heal. Prosecutors emphasized that mental illness is never an excuse for violence, but they acknowledged that untreated crisis played a devastating role in what happened that day. This case served as a wake-up call across Montgomery County. Experts in family psychology pointed out that the COVID-19 pandemic, then in its early stages, had intensified isolation, depression, and anxiety, particularly among single parents. What Ann Akers did was unforgivable, but it also forced a conversation about the hidden mental struggles that can turn inward and destroy what a parent holds most dear. Ann Catherine Akers ultimately faced trial, where her defense centered on her mental health. The court ordered a full psychological evaluation to determine her competency to stand trial. She remains under state supervision as part of ongoing legal proceedings tied to her actions that morning. The story of Ann Akers is not one of evil, but of a mind that shattered beneath invisible pressure. It is a reminder that mental illness, left untreated, can twist love into something unrecognizable, and that silence can be just as deadly as the act itself. For parents battling inner storms, this case stands as both a warning and a plea. Seek help before the darkness convinces you there's no way out. The child in this case survived because of swift police action, but too many others do not. Her recovery is a miracle, but it came at a price that no family should ever pay. Case 5. The Beaten Innocence, Aurielle Montgomery, in the heart of Baltimore County, behind the closed door of a small apartment on Fox Ridge Lane. A 1-year-old girl named Nyemia Millen Gilliard spent her final moments in silence. On February 22, 2022, police officers responded to a 911 call for an unresponsive child. What they found inside would haunt them long after the investigation ended. The baby lay lifeless, her small body covered in bruises, her face marked with the unmistakable signs of violent trauma. Her mother, Aurielle Montgomery, stood nearby, emotionless and detached. At first, Montgomery claimed her daughter had fallen while learning to walk, but the story unraveled almost instantly. The injuries were too severe, too deliberate. The medical examiner found multiple blunt force injuries, internal bleeding, and evidence of sustained abuse. Charging documents later revealed that Montgomery had beaten her daughter over several days, angered by the child's crying and inability to sleep. The autopsy confirmed what detectives already suspected. This was not an accident, it was murder. In the days that followed, neighbors and relatives struggled to understand how such horror could grow unnoticed. Some remembered hearing faint cries through the walls. Others described Montgomery as withdrawn, a young woman living alone, rarely seen outside. To the world, she was another single mother trying to survive. But inside that apartment, something darker was unfolding, a spiral of anger, neglect, and silence that would end a child's life. Detectives from the Baltimore County Police Department worked tirelessly to document every detail. The apartment was littered with signs of struggle, broken objects, stained bedding, and a small play area that had turned into a crime scene. The child's few toys lay untouched beside the wall. Montgomery was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, first-degree child abuse resulting in death, and assault. As the case made its way to court, prosecutors painted a chilling picture of a mother whose rage turned fatal. They called it a depraved heart killing, a deliberate act born not of a single moment but of sustained cruelty. In July 2025, Montgomery pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Baltimore County State's Attorney Scott Schellenberger described it as a tragedy that should never have happened, adding that Nyemia's death was the consequence of unchecked frustration and violence against the most defenseless among us. During sentencing, prosecutors read aloud the timeline of the final days of the toddler's life. Each line broke the courtroom's silence. The medical examiner testified that the child had been struck repeatedly, her injuries consistent with intentional blunt trauma. The judge's voice trembled as he delivered the sentence, saying, "There is no sentence long enough to measure the value of a child's life." Outside the courtroom, her father's grief was immortalized in the most human way possible. On March Funeral Home's Life Tribute page, family and friends filled the memorial with words of love. Her father, Joawan Gilliard, wrote messages of heartbreak and faith, speaking to his daughter as though she could still hear him. "Daddy's still here. Like I told you I was going to be. You'll forever be on my side when I make it to you." His words captured both unbearable loss and the hope of reunion in heaven. The obituary described Nyemia as a lifetime of love in such a short period, born on June 11th, 2021 at Sinai Hospital, weighing 6 pounds and 8 ounces. She lived for just 16 months, but her small life changed everyone who knew her. For Baltimore County, the case of Aurielle Montgomery became another grim reminder of how quickly neglect can become tragedy. Advocates for children's welfare renewed calls for earlier intervention and more support for struggling parents. "We must learn to hear the silent signs," one social worker said. "When a mother feels overwhelmed, that's when the system must step in, before frustration turns fatal." This case leaves behind one undeniable truth: a child's cry should never be met with violence. Nyemia's story is a heartbreaking echo of innocence lost, a reminder that parenting, especially in isolation, can break the strongest hearts if help never comes. For parents struggling with anger, exhaustion, or hopelessness, there is always another path. Help exists before harm does. Call 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, or reach out to local child and family services. Silence protects no one. Love, spoken out loud, can save a life. Case 6, the teen who lived, Talecka Brown, shot for speaking up. The 911 call came from the 500 block of 69th Place in Seat Pleasant, Prince George's County. On the line was a mother, Talecka Brown, reporting a horrifying scene, claiming that a homeless man had broken into her home and shot her 13-year-old daughter. But what first responders would soon uncover wasn't a break-in, it was a betrayal. When police entered the home, they found the teenager collapsed on the stairs, blood pooling beneath her, a single bullet wound tearing through her neck. The supposed intruder didn't exist. The shooter was her mother. The sound of that 911 call wasn't panic, it was fabrication, a lie told to erase the truth before it could breathe. The victim was a 13-year-old girl, a bright, curious child, whose life should have revolved around school, laughter, and friends. Instead, a simple argument on a Monday afternoon in 2024 turned into horror. The altercation escalated beyond words, beyond shouting, into an act of irreversible violence. In an instant, her mother, the one person meant to protect her, became the source of her greatest pain. The bullet shattered more than bone. It shattered trust. When officers arrived, they found the young girl clinging to life. She was immediately rushed to the Children's National Hospital Intensive Care Unit, her survival uncertain. The wound to her neck made every second critical. but the police were already suspicious. Talecka's story about a break-in and a fleeing gunman didn't match the evidence. No signs of forced entry, no weapon missing, no witnesses to a stranger. Within hours, detectives confirmed the unthinkable. The only person who fired a gun inside that home was the child's mother. Even after the shooting, Brown's actions defied every maternal instinct. Prosecutors later revealed that while her daughter lay bleeding, unable to move, Brown showed no concern for her safety. Instead, she began crafting lies, trying to rewrite the story. She instructed her critically injured daughter to say a homeless man had entered and fired the shot. It was not the act of a desperate woman, it was the behavior of someone trying to cover a crime. Police arrested Brown that night and charged her with attempted first-degree murder, first-degree assault, and multiple firearm offenses. Even then, her focus was not on her daughter's recovery, but on herself. Her first words were about the case, not the child. Her first concern was the story, not the truth. It was a chilling contrast. A mother who could have lost her daughter and yet cared only about escaping blame. From jail, Brown made a call that prosecutors later described as one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence in the case. She left a message for the girl's father saying that if the teenager refused to testify, the case would go away. She wanted her child's silence to save her. But the voicemail did the opposite. It became the defining proof of her guilt, exposing her attempt to manipulate and intimidate her own daughter from behind bars. When the trial began, the prosecution made it clear this case was about more than violence. It was about betrayal. They played the 911 recording, the security footage, and the jail calls. Each piece built the portrait of a mother who shot her daughter, lied to the world, and then tried to silence the truth. The state's attorney's office called the victim a survivor of both violence and manipulation, a child whose courage stood as proof that even the smallest voice can bring justice. In November 2025, a Prince George's County jury convicted Talecka Brown of attempted second-degree murder, first-degree child abuse, and related firearm charges. The verdict carried a potential life sentence and a message. Violence against a child is unforgivable, but trying to rewrite their truth is even worse. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the decision, calling Brown's actions the highest form of betrayal, a parent who not only harmed her child, but sought to erase her voice. The story of this 13-year-old survivor is one of both pain and extraordinary strength. She lived through an act meant to end her life and endured an even greater test, the psychological pressure to protect the person who hurt her. As Prince George's County State's Attorney, Aisha Braveboy, stated, "The physical wounds may heal, but the emotional scars will last a lifetime." This case exposes a hidden danger. When children are coerced to lie after trauma, their silence becomes a second crime. Protecting a child doesn't end with rescuing them from harm. It continues in protecting their truth afterward. Parents hold profound influence, even from behind bars. Words of guilt, pressure, or shame can destroy a child's will to speak. Society must guard their voices fiercely, ensuring that survivors of family violence never stand alone in court or in life. The girl who survived her mother's bullet also survived her silence. Her courage gives voice to every child who fears telling the truth about those they love. Her recovery is a living reminder that justice is not only about punishment, it's about protecting the fragile light of every child who dares to speak after the darkness. Case 7, the starvation of Blair Niles, the mother who watched her child fade. It began on a quiet July morning in 2020 when 23-year-old Kiearra Tolson walked into a Montgomery County police station in Silver Spring, Maryland. Her voice was calm, her words were chilling. She told officers that her 15-month-old daughter, Blair Niles, was dead, that she had starved her to death. What she said next froze investigators where they stood. She admitted that after the baby's death, she wrapped her small body in a trash bag and threw her away in a dumpster behind their apartment building. Detectives rushed to confirm what sounded too monstrous to believe. They found the child's remains where Tolson said they would be. the autopsy revealed what the mother already knew. Blair had died from malnutrition and dehydration. For weeks, the baby girl had cried until she couldn't cry anymore. She weighed just over 10 pounds when she died, half of what a healthy child her age should have been. Police questioned Tolson, who said she had stopped feeding Blair because she was tired of caring for her. Her words, flat and detached, offered no remorse, no recognition of the suffering her daughter endured. It wasn't rage or desperation that drove this act. It was apathy, a slow and conscious withdrawal from the very duty of motherhood. Prosecutors later described the case as one of the most horrific acts of prolonged neglect Montgomery County had ever seen in court. Documents and psychiatric evaluations, investigators found that Tolson showed signs of severe mental illness. She lived in isolation, had no steady support system, and had gradually become detached from reality. After months of evaluation at the Clifton T. Perkins Hospital Center, doctors determined she was not competent to stand trial. Eventually, in early 2022, she entered a plea of guilty but not criminally responsible, Maryland's version of an insanity defense. Judge Terrence McGann accepted the plea, ruling that Tolson would be committed indefinitely to a secure psychiatric facility. He stated that this was not justice as punishment, but justice as protection for society and for those who might otherwise suffer if her illness went untreated. The ruling brought little comfort to those who had followed the case. For Blair's short, painful life, there would be no traditional sentencing, no prison term, only an open-ended stay in a hospital for the woman who watched her starve. The images that emerged from the investigation remain unbearable. The crib empty, the refrigerator half-stocked, a baby's belongings scattered as if time had simply stopped. For detectives, this was not a scene of chaos, but of abandonment. One officer said later, "You could feel how long the silence had lasted in that apartment." But as experts later noted, Kiearra Tolson was not evil. She was deeply ill, a young mother unraveling in isolation, untreated, unseen, and unheard. Psychiatrists testified that she suffered from a form of psychotic depression that left her emotionally detached and cognitively impaired. In her mind, the boundaries between exhaustion and delusion had vanished. She didn't understand the passage of time or the weight of her choices. Her crime was born not from hatred, but from the catastrophic collapse of her mind. For many, this case reignited the conversation about mental health and postpartum neglect, particularly for young mothers living alone and unsupported. Experts explained that untreated depression or psychosis can distort a mother's perception of her child, not into anger, but indifference. When that indifference goes unnoticed, it becomes deadly. Blair's death stands as a haunting reminder that motherhood without support can become isolation, and isolation can become tragedy. Her name, Blair Niles, is now spoken in advocacy groups across Maryland as a call for earlier intervention and community awareness. Her short life revealed the cracks in a system that too often misses quiet suffering until it's too late. There are no words strong enough to capture what was lost. A baby's laughter, her first steps, her chance to grow up. But there is a message that endures. Mental illness doesn't make a mother evil. Neglecting the signs does. Children like Blair deserve to be seen, to be protected, and to never fade unnoticed into silence. Case 8. The final cries of an infant, the death of baby girl Dennis. New Year's Eve. 2024 was supposed to be a night of celebration, but inside a small apartment in Aberdeen, Maryland, it became a night of irreversible tragedy. When officers responded to the emergency call, they found a 5.5-month-old baby girl lying motionless, her tiny body covered in bruises, her skull fractured, and her brain bleeding. The person standing nearby, silent, detached, was her 25-year-old mother, Maya Dennis. At first, the explanations changed with each question. Dennis told police her daughter had fallen from a bed. Later, she said she had slipped in the shower while holding her. Then, that the baby had been acting different since the day before. None of it matched the evidence. The medical examiner's report revealed the truth. Multiple skull fractures, brain hemorrhages, and broken ribs. Injuries so severe they could only have come from violent force, not an accident. Harford County detectives described the scene as one of the hardest they'd ever witnessed. Toys lay scattered in the room untouched. The child's clothing bore faint signs of recent washing, an attempt, investigators believed, to clean away the visible injuries. But the truth could not be scrubbed away. The autopsy confirmed the baby had suffered weeks of ongoing trauma, culminating in one final blow that caused catastrophic brain swelling and death. Prosecutors charged Maya Dennis with first-degree murder and first-degree child abuse resulting in death. Her arrest affidavit revealed chilling detail. She initially delayed calling 911, waiting as her baby's breathing slowed. When paramedics arrived, the child's pulse was faint. She was pronounced dead shortly after reaching the hospital. The inconsistency of Dennis's statements and the severity of the injuries left no room for doubt. This was not neglect, it was brutality. During the investigation, neighbors described Dennis as quiet, withdrawn, and rarely seen with her child. One neighbor told WBAL-TV, "I heard the baby crying a lot before, then it just stopped." That silence, once a brief relief to those nearby, became the echo of a tragedy they would never forget. In court, the state painted a devastating picture: a mother who inflicted repeated harm on her infant, then offered lies instead of help. The prosecutor called it a sustained pattern of cruelty against the most defenseless victim imaginable. Detectives said the child's injuries reflected more than one episode of violence, suggesting the baby endured multiple beatings before her final night alive. While the case awaits full resolution in the Maryland courts, what's already clear is that the child's suffering was not instantaneous, it was prolonged. The little girl fought for life for as long as her fragile body could, a battle she should never have had to fight. For Harford County investigators and the community of Aberdeen, this case shattered a familiar illusion that such horrors only happen somewhere else. It happened here, to a baby born into the arms of someone who should have been her only protection. Experts in child welfare say cases like this must serve as a public reckoning. Infant deaths from abuse are almost always preceded by signs: unexplained bruises, isolation, erratic caregiver behavior. Pediatricians, relatives, neighbors, all are the last line between harm and hope. Speaking up, even in uncertainty, can save a child who cannot yet speak for themselves. As Harford County State's attorney, Allison Healy, said after the charges were filed, "This child's short life ended in unimaginable pain. Justice demands we speak for her now." The name of the victim has not been publicly released, but her story doesn't need one to carry its weight. She was 5 months old, innocent, dependent, and silenced before she could even form words. Her memory lives on as both heartbreak and warning, a reminder that every child's cry deserves to be heard and every bruise deserves to be questioned before the silence becomes permanent. Case 9, the poisoning of Daniel Dana, a mother's fatal obsession. In June 2015, Montgomery County, Maryland, woke to one of the most chilling domestic crimes the region had ever seen. A mother, Narges Shafeirad, had driven her 5-year-old son, Daniel Dana, to school for what seemed like any ordinary morning. But by nightfall, the little boy was dead, poisoned, burned, and betrayed by the one person he trusted most in the world. According to court documents and prosecutors' statements, the tragedy began as an act of vengeance. Shafeirad was in the middle of a contentious divorce and custody battle with Daniel's father. On the very day a court hearing was set to finalize custody, she made an unthinkable decision. If she couldn't have her son, no one would. Investigators later revealed that before leaving home, Shafeirad gave Daniel a fatal overdose of diphenhydramine. The the active ingredient in antihistamines like Benadryl. It wasn't a sudden impulse, it was a premeditated act. Toxicology reports confirmed that Daniel had ingested a lethal concentration of the drug, strong enough to sedate and stop the heart of a child his size. Once he was unconscious, she placed him in her car, drove to a stretch of road along Interstate 270, and set the vehicle on fire in an attempt to stage a crash. Firefighters arrived to find a vehicle engulfed in flames. When the blaze was extinguished, they discovered Daniel's small body strapped in his booster seat. The medical examiner determined he had died before the fire started. His lungs showed no soot, no sign of breathing during the blaze. The flames were meant to cover the truth, but they only exposed something darker, a deliberate killing masked as tragedy. When questioned, Shafeirad told investigators she had fallen asleep at the wheel and didn't remember what happened. But the evidence told a different story. Surveillance cameras caught her buying cold medicine earlier that day, and forensic experts traced the fire's origin to accelerants placed inside the car near her son's seat. She had not been asleep. She had been staging the scene of a crime. During the sentencing, prosecutors described her actions as the ultimate betrayal, a mother weaponizing her child's trust. Montgomery County State's Attorney John McCarthy said in court, "This was not an accident. This was an execution, methodical, planned, and heartless." Shafeirad eventually pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and arson. In 2017, Judge Terrence McGann sentenced her to 50 years in prison, calling her crime a breathtaking violation of maternal duty. He said her actions reflected cold calculation cloaked in the false image of care. Those who knew Daniel spoke of him as gentle and bright, a boy who loved cars, dinosaurs, and telling stories to anyone who would listen. His teachers described him as curious and affectionate, a child who made every room lighter. The contrast between his innocence and the brutality of his death haunted the entire community. Experts in forensic psychology later analyzed the case, noting that Shafeirad's actions bore hallmarks of maternal possessive homicide, killings driven by control, revenge, or the perception of losing power over a child. It's rare but deeply disturbing, often intertwined with narcissistic breakdowns and emotional collapse in high-conflict separations. The need to preserve control overtakes the instinct to protect. What makes this case unforgettable is not just the cruelty, but the motive. Love twisted into ownership, care turned into destruction. The very bond meant to nurture life became the instrument of death. At Daniel's memorial, his father stood before a small crowd and spoke through tears. He trusted her completely. He didn't know she saw him as something to win or lose. He just wanted his mom. His words captured the unbearable truth. Daniel's love was pure. His mother's was poisoned. Today, Daniel's story endures as both warning and remembrance, a reminder of how obsession can turn even love into something lethal, and how justice, though it came too late for one child, can still speak for those who can no longer speak for themselves. Case 10, The Boy Who Survived the Flames, The Cruelty of Kimberly Tyler. In a quiet Germantown neighborhood on an ordinary morning in 2022, the scream of an 8-year-old boy broke the silence, a sound so raw that neighbors rushed to their windows, unsure if what they were hearing was real. Inside that home, police would later discover one of the most disturbing cases of child abuse Montgomery County had ever seen. A mother, Kimberly Tyler, had set her own son on fire, all because he spilled cereal on the floor. According to court documents and witness testimony, the argument began in the kitchen. The boy had accidentally made a mess while eating breakfast, and his mother, already consumed by anger, snapped. Prosecutors said Tyler poured a flammable liquid on his body, then lit him blaze. The boy's small frame ignited instantly. His skin melted as he screamed for help. The flames were eventually extinguished, but not before leaving third-degree burns over a quarter of his body. Burns that doctors say will scar him for life. Neighbors told reporters they could still hear the child's screams in their minds. One said, "It didn't sound human. It was pain you can't unhear." What investigators found afterward made the act even harder to comprehend. Rather than calling 911, Tyler reportedly delayed seeking help, attempting to treat the injuries herself with ointment and bandages. Hours passed before the boy finally received medical care. When the child was examined at the hospital, doctors were horrified. His burns were deep, consistent with direct exposure to open flame. Medical staff immediately contacted authorities, and within hours, Tyler was arrested. During interviews, she claimed it was a disciplinary act that went too far, but prosecutors described it differently as torture, not discipline, and said her deliberate use of fire on a child reflected an act of rage far beyond human comprehension. In April 2024, Kimberly Tyler, 34, was sentenced to 25 years in prison for first-degree child abuse and first-degree assault. Judge Carla Smith told the court, "This is among the worst cases we have ever seen. There is no lesson, no justification, and no redemption in what you did." The courtroom was silent as the judge described the child's permanent scars, both physical and emotional. He had survived, but the damage would follow him forever. The boy now lives with relatives, undergoing multiple surgeries to repair the extensive burns. He wears compression garments and faces years of therapy, not only to restore his mobility, but to rebuild the sense of safety taken from him. Prosecutors said his courage during recovery was extraordinary. Even after everything, he told investigators, he still loved his mother. That statement broke the courtroom. Child welfare experts later emphasized that this case exemplifies the devastating effects of untreated anger and generational trauma. Abusive discipline is never about teaching a lesson. It's about control and power. When rage replaces reason, love becomes danger. Experts say it's critical for communities to recognize early warning signs, harsh verbal punishment, physical escalation, and isolation of children from others. Intervention at those points can stop tragedy before it begins. Montgomery County State's Attorney John McCarthy said it best. This child was punished for being a child, for eating, for spilling cereal, for existing in the wrong moment. No child should ever have to survive love that burns. The boy's survival stands as both horror and hope, proof that even through unbearable cruelty, resilience can rise. His scars tell a story no child should bear, but his voice, alive, steady, and healing, carries the strength of every child who refuses to be defined by pain. These 10 narratives, drawn from the deepest shadows of Maryland's communities, are not told to define a state, nor to sensationalize tragedy. They are a mirror held up to the human condition, a devastating reflection of what happens when isolation, untreated suffering, and desperation are allowed to fester in silence. We must be clear, these stories are not an indictment of Maryland, and they must never be used to stigmatize mental illness. The crimes are individual, the lessons are universal. Some of the women in this collection, like Anne Catherine Akers and Kiearra Tolson, remind us that evil and illness are not the same. Their actions were monstrous, yes, but they were also the product of profound, untreated psychological collapse. When the human mind fractures without intervention, even love can twist into destruction. Mental illness is not a moral failure, it's a medical one. To frame these cases simply as evil is to ignore the deadly consequence of silence. Yet silence is what allowed so many of these tragedies to unfold. Jocelyn and Larry Johnson, Nevaeh Carr, Nyemia Gilliard, and others might still be alive. Had someone spoken sooner, had someone seen the quiet signs, the withdrawn parent, the child always hungry, the neighbor whose behavior suddenly shifts from exhaustion to detachment. These small indicators are often the last warnings before catastrophe. The call to action is simple but urgent. See the signs. Speak without hesitation. Seek and offer help. If something feels wrong, say something. Uncertainty is a small price to pay for saving a life. These stories do not celebrate horror. They confront it. They stand as memorials to the children whose lives were stolen and as lessons for the living who can still intervene. For those battling their own inner storms, know this: there is always help, there is always hope, and seeking it is never weakness. We do not glorify violence. We amplify the cost of ignoring it. We do not dwell in fear. We rise from it for the sake of the innocent. Let these stories stand as a vow that their suffering will not be forgotten, that their names will not fade into silence, and that we, as a society, will do everything in our power to protect the next child before tragedy repeats itself. Share your thoughts below. Which cases shocked you most, and which stories do you believe should be told next? Every comment, every share, every voice helps raise awareness and prevent the next tragedy. Together, we can stop the silence before it becomes sorrow. If this story moved you, subscribe, like, and help us continue to give voice to the victims who can no longer speak for themselves.